How do you feel about the way your parents raised you? Are you happy with it? Or are you planning to or doing things differently? Are you trying hard to do it better, to be a better parent than you had? Parenting is probably the most important job there is. And with me to discuss that today is Nicole Runyon. She's a psychotherapist, a, a public speaker, and a parent coach. Nicole, thank you so much for agreeing to chat to me and welcome here.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Please tell us, what is it that you do and how did you come to do the work that you do?
So I started out being a child psychotherapist, and part of doing therapy with children is involving the parents. And so I noticed right around 2014 that there was a major issue with the children that wasn't typical and wasn't according to my training, really wasn't matching
Mhm.
what I knew. And what I knew was that if a child is having a problem or a dysfunction or a pathology, likely there's a root cause from their environment, either from their family dynamic or from their educational situation or their neighborhood or community. And so I would have children in front of me with very severe mental health issues with no root in any kind of trauma or psychosocial reason for it. And I asked myself what was happening. And the only thing I could pinpoint as to why I was seeing this major change was at the time was technology, because the children had gotten more access to it. Many of them were having being given their own smart devices, allowed to take them to school, allowed to be on them at school, and then using social media.
Mm.
And I really started to connect that their mental health was being affected by it. And over the next, decade, I have really honed in on my message, and it's now more sophisticated in the way of it's not just the tech. The tech is a modality for keeping the kids comfortable, but ultimately it's the parents' inability to make themselves uncomfortable to allow their children to be uncomfortable, whether that means saying no to tech, delaying tech, having limits and boundaries around tech. Um, Parents are really struggling with that, and it's harming the children. And
Mm.
so it started to become unethical to see the children, to diagnose them, to pathologize them, to watch them be put on medication.
Mhm.
And so I thought, well, I really want to talk to the parents, because I think the parents can affect a lot of change here. And in fact, prevent kids from needing therapy, from getting a diagnosis, from having problems, if they just had the tools and the information.
I'm
So I
so glad
started to.
you mentioned that because it's one of the main questions I also ask parents when I work with parents is how much of your parenting are you doing because you can't cope
Mm.
instead of the child that is not coping? And that's a hard question to answer. So what is it? You say the technology is a modality. What is it about the parenting that is causing all these mental health problems?
I think today's parents absolutely didn't get what they needed in their childhood. So we have Gen X is parenting Gen Z, which are our current teenagers and young adults,
Mm.
and then we have the millennials who are parenting Alpha. And both generations, for different reasons, didn't get
Mm.
what we needed, right? So Gen X, very generally, now I'm not talking about every single family, but just from a cultural perspective, Gen X was considered the forgotten about generation, or the latchkey generation,
Mm.
because their mothers went to work.
Mm.
And I'm a working mom. By no means am I saying women shouldn't work. What happened during that time is there was no conversation in the family around who's going to do what, the division of labor. And
Mhm.
so the tasks of childcare and home life fell on the mothers. And then we had what's called the second shift, which is that
Yes.
moms would work all day and then they would come home and do all the other things. And so because they were so overwhelmed by that, they weren't available to their children, right? So a lot of Gen Xers grew up feeling neglected, abandoned, again, forgotten about. They were left in daycare all day, and latchkey after school and into the evening. And so because of that lack of connection to their parents and attachment and that feeling of abandonment, they have pendulum swung too far in the other direction with their children. And they do not want their children to experience any discomfort at all.
Yes.
And so what we've done is we've been very concerned, overly concerned about their feelings. We don't want to hurt their feelings. We don't want to not give them a trophy because what if they feel bad? That's not fair. All that kind of energy started to come into our culture. And for Gen Z, right at their identity development phase, around 12 and middle schoolish age, technology comes on the scene. And everybody has a smart device and people are on social media. And so this really was a perfect storm for them to have that affect their mental health. And then on the other side of things, we have the millennials who themselves, many of them have grown up with more tech than what the Gen X generation had, right? Not as much as the current children, but more. And so the parenting really started, the culture of parenting where we wanted to keep the kids comfortable started with the millennials because they started to look less capable. Many of them were interacting on AOL Instant Messenger rather than in person. The video games at the time became more sophisticated, and so they were on them for longer. And then their functioning was just lower. And the parents didn't really know what to do because they didn't know what hit them. And so that's when the let's keep the kids comfortable mentality started.
And avoid the difficult stuff or the tough stuff.
That's right. And so what the millennials are doing with their alpha children is again keeping them comfortable. And for alpha, they have way more products available to them younger. And they even make tablets or iPads for toddlers with the protective covering around it because they know that it's going to get dropped and they don't want to break them. And then they have the colorful headphones. And, then there's all the YouTube influencers, like, for example, Miss Rachel, who is talking to literally babies. So there are products on the market now for young ones. And millennials, because they grew up with this, really don't think anything of it and think this is just a part of childhood, but it's preventing development every step of the way.
It's fascinating how it has actually impacted and taken over our lives. Can we take a moment and just take a step back to a generation or two before then and just compare what was it like then? Because there was an absence of technology, largely. But the family dynamic was different also. You mentioned the latchkey kids who grew up without a primary caregiving parent in the home. But it was different before then. But why was it so different in terms of the impact on the mental health in your experience?
I think that technology literally changed the parenting. So it might seem like a chicken egg thing, but it's not. It's the technology came on the scene and everything changed, particularly because nobody knew what hit them. It was like a slow boiling frog. So, for example, the baby boomers were the first generation to have a family TV.
That's right.
And the television was really central to the family. They would watch it while they ate dinner. And at the time, of course, they didn't have 24-hour cable, so everybody was watching the same programming. And so it connected people, right? It was like, if we're going to have dinner at this time, then this particular show is going to be on, and then I'm going to see my friends and we're going to talk about that show. Whereas now you have 100 different things you can watch. And so when you go to talk to your friends about what you're watching, they're likely going to have watched something different from you. and then
Mm.
you're going to want to watch that, and then you're just going to keep consuming more and more. But the reason why I think it was a slow boiling frog is because for the boomer generation, it was pretty benign, right? I mean, it was connecting, it was
Mm.
fun. I know the way my parents are boomers, the way they describe television, it was exciting and, you know, mostly positive.
Mm.
So then the way that they were raising their kids was whatever new technology came on the scene, it was going to be positive. It was going to enhance life. There was nothing wrong with it. I know I grew up with the TV on nonstop. It was on nonstop. We ate in
Mm.
front of the TV. It was in the background. There was a TV in all of our bedrooms. And I'm at the tail end of Gen X. So if I didn't have awareness, then I would be doing the same thing with my children.
Mm. Mm. I grew up in the time when TV came
Mhm.
as a child, and I remember, as you said, that it did replace the family dinners around the table where there was interaction and conversation going on, and everybody was talking about how their day went, and there was a connection of a different sort. But then the TV show was like a weekly highlight sort of thing, and like you said, everybody would talk about it afterwards, so it was connecting. And we didn't have any negative experience associated with us. So we didn't perceive it as a threat. Coming the next generation and parenting, I can see how you're saying it was easy to just, allow the technology in and the growth of it. But it literally took over. It has replaced the social interaction, the eye contact, the connection with another person. Something that I find very interesting is with some of the young people who will actually get together and sit next to each other, but scroll through their phones and look at their phones together and laugh about the memes and the things that they are watching. And that's how they interact, but it's not really interaction. There's not really a connection. There's not really a exchange of information going on. They viewers or passive observers of something else.
Yes. Yes, I've witnessed that with today's children, and it's quite disturbing
Mm.
because you're right. It is, you can liken it to the way you grew up, where it used to be there was this conversation around the dinner table, and then there was this modality that was
Mm.
preventing that. And now it's not just, the 8 o'clock program that's
Mm.
disrupting that. It's constant pervasive disruption to the
Mm.
connection. Yeah.
And I remember stories that I was told by my grandparents of the family gathering in the kitchen around the radio to listen to a story.
Yes.
It was also like a social event, a bonding exercise almost, so to speak. But it's like the technology has become the substitute parents, but there's no parenting happening.
Yes.
Mm.
Yes. That is really the issue. At the very core, it's a lack of connection in the family to
Mm.
start. And then children go out in the world and they lack the connection with their peers, with other adults, because they don't have that foundation.
And they've also not learned how to do it. As I was saying, the technology replaced the parents. The technology actually became nannies.
Yes.
Mm.
Yes, absolutely. Because today's parents actually are very fearful of the world, and they
Mm.
would prefer that their children are at home on a device because they actually think that's safer.
Yes.
When really the opposite is true, that
Mm.
the predators are online. There's content online that is way beyond their maturity that even
Mm.
adults shouldn't be watching. Even the television shows are more intense in the content
Mm.
and showing more. Whereas, when you and I were younger, it was left up to imagination.
Mm.
And so the prevention from being out in the real world because it's seemingly unsafe is actually causing a safety issue for the kids, and the
Mm.
parents don't even know it.
There's a new danger inside every home because there's access to everything. Mm.
Yeah.
It's frightening. So what do you say to parents who are so afraid, who are keeping their children at home inside? How do you help them to understand this and overcome this and basically change the way they parent?
I explain child development
Mm-hmm.
actually very deeply in 4 parts. And it starts with movement.
Mm-hmm.
And then movement scaffolds the brain for growth. And if the brain can grow and flourish, then children can develop their social emotional needs. And then that will lead to a connection to themselves. So if parents understand all along the way at what ages their children need to do things, for example, when should they learn how to tie their shoes? When should they learn how to cook a meal? When
Mm,
should they learn financial literacy? How are we going to prepare them for the world to leave our home, right? All of these things, parents, I think, are leaving up to either technology to teach the kids, education, or just life. But the children aren't learning that because they're not living life. They're mostly online. So my, the main source of my information is all about uh, what they need when, so that parents can understand that 2 things are happening when they're on the device. One is that they're being exposed to things that they're not ready for. And
mhm,
2 is that they're not doing what they need to be doing to develop and grow. So what are they not doing when they're on technology is the question.
mm. And that is something that every parent needs to know, actually, the basic information, the developmental stages, like you said, the things children need, is actually important information that every parent needs to have. So those are the basics that we need to know, if you
Yeah,
think.
and I'm noticing actually that parents don't know the basics.
Yeah, but
And I think
there's no standard training out there for parents. There's no existing system or process that everybody goes through before they have children to learn these things. If we don't educate ourselves, it doesn't happen.
yes, and I think that today's parents don't, they take it for granted that we all learned it in our childhoods
Mhm,
because we didn't have these modalities to avoid learning it. So, for example, it used to be you go outside and you play with other kids and there's no adult supervision
mm,
and you have that sort of independence and freedom. And there's actually a lot of learning in that.
mm,
There's learning how to resolve conflict. There's learning how to keep track of time. I remember my mom, would say we had to be home at a certain time, and
mhm,
we didn't have smart devices or whatever. So we had to figure out how we were going to keep track of the time when we were
mm,
away from home, and being responsible enough and not so impulsive to stay out longer than we were allowed to. So basic things that kids were just learning naturally in their environments in previous generations, it's not happening now. And
mm,
parents don't realize you actually have to teach it now. You actually have to go out of your way to teach them how to think critically. Many
mm,
kids are using the weather app. I live in a state where the weather when the seasons change can be anything and any
mhm,
given day. And so if your child is looking at the weather app in the morning and hour by hour seeing what the weather is going to be, then that's reducing their critical thinking skills
mm,
to determine how they're going to actually go through their day. So,
mm,
what they actually need to be doing instead of pressing that button on the weather app is opening the door, feeling the weather, using
mm,
their critical thinking to think, well, it's
mhm,
spring, it's cold this morning, but the sun's going to come out and it's going to get warmer. And so I have to
mhm.
figure out how to dress for my day, right?
Yes.
In
Mm,
layers or whatever.
mm,
Or, oh, it's cloudy in the sky or it's gray. It might rain. I might want to bring
mm,
my umbrella
mhm.
instead of looking hour by hour to see when it's going to rain.
Yeah. So it's about the lifestyle that allowed for children to learn things almost organically because of their activities and the things that they did and the
Yes,
interactions with other children, which is now completely removed. So now teaching basic life skills and social skills has to be done with a concerted effort and actually focusing on teaching them that.
absolutely.
Mm,
Yes. And I really want parents to be aware of
mm,
that because we're not, and we think that they're learning it out in the world. But to your point, what they're actually doing out in the world is showing each other memes on their phones. So they're not learning interaction when they're away from you with their friends at school or whatever.
They're just consuming something.
Mhm.
Mm.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
really sad. I want to ask you also something that I've experienced actually over the last couple of decades. There was a time also where parents would send their children to school and kind of hand over the parenting responsibility to the school and the teachers also, and not take so much upon themselves. I think it probably coincides with when both parents started working outside of the home, having to generate an income to keep the family afloat and so on. Children were kind of, you know, upbringing, teaching basic things were left to the school also. And that in itself had an impact on how that generation grew up. Whereas,
Absolutely. Oh, go ahead.
yeah, no, whereas these days, the parents being so fearful, always almost see schools as a threat to some degree.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think that is a really good point. I think there's a huge disconnect with parents and teachers and schools and how they view their role. And it really should be a symbiotic relationship.
Mm,
You know, the parents have a part, the school has a part. And the right now, I think the boundaries are very blurred and people are confused about
mm,
whose role is what.
mm,
And I actually see the parents expecting the school to do what they don't want to do. So, for
mm,
example, parents want to send their kids to school with devices, many of them because they're fearful of what might happen during the school day,
mhm,
school shootings or
mm,
whatever they're fearful of. But they also don't want the phones to be a distraction in the classroom.
mm,
And in my opinion, you really can't have both. You can't have that feeling that you can be in touch with your kid all day long and the phone is can't be a distraction. It's just not working. And
mm,
so parents aren't very trusting of schools to say, hey, we got your kids. You know, if
mm,
they need to call you, there's a phone in the office.
mm,
If they need to call you, then, their phones can be in a pocket in the front of the room or whatever.
mm,
But yeah, I think that those boundaries are very blurred, mainly because parents are struggling to be away from their kids, to let their kids separate, to let their kids have experiences that are not with them. And that is a result of a lack of connection in the family.
mhm,
So if you feel connected with your child, then you know what they need when developmentally. You've given that to them, and there's a readiness for them to go
mm,
out in the world and trust
mm,
themselves.
mhm,
So say for example, the worst of the worst would be a school shooting, right?
mm,
Ideally, you as the parent would want to know that you have enough of a connection with your child that you've talked about it, likely ad nauseum, about what would you do?
mm,
How can you get yourself out of that situation? How do you
mhm,
trust yourself? And
mm,
9 times out of 10, the school's going to have a protocol and you've
mm,
practiced that protocol. And so as the parent, it's your job to say, you got this. Like if that happens, that's absolutely awful. And we will deal with that, but you've got this.
mm,
And you sending them the message that you trust them
mhm,
makes them trust themselves. And
mm,
then you see
mm,
that in them. And then you see the growth and the maturity and the independence. And then you trust them more. And so you slowly start to be able to let go of them during the day or in general, when
mhm,
they're old enough to leave you.
mm. It's almost as if the parents have more of an attachment issue than the children have, because I think it's a natural progression for a child to grow up and become more independent and to have the desire to venture out and do their own thing and be free and from the parents. It's the parents that are hanging on for dear life, and you reckon it's all based on this fear that was cultivated and the lack of connection.
Yes. Yes.
Mm,
Because the lack of connection is causing the anxiety.
Mm,
And so the parents are the leaders of the family. They set the tone. So children aren't naturally anxious. Sometimes in their development
right.
they are, because that's
Mm,
normal. And
mm,
we need to be able to be okay with that and let them go through it. But they're not naturally panic disordered. And
no. Yeah.
and the very fact that so many of them are struggling with anxiety and panic and OCD really should be cause for us to ask ourselves why. It's an
Mm,
indicator.
mhm,
And it 100% is parental anxiety.
mhm,
And I'm a parent myself. I'm not pointing the finger. I'm not judging. I understand that there's a lot of scary stuff out there for children. I get
mm,
it.
mm.
Um, and at the same time, I want parents to know that the power of your relationship is enough. It's enough, period.
That's beautiful. The power of your relationship is enough. And we need to learn to trust that also.
Mhm.
And parents who don't have that or unsure of that, I'm sure there are ways that they can build that, cultivate that. How do you suggest they do that? Let's say I am a fearful parent and I have a lot of anxiety around my child and letting them leave the house. Where do I start? How do I address this fear and anxiety that I have?
Well, I think that requires the parent to do some self-reflection. So
Mm-hmm.
whether that's mindfulness work, meditation, therapy, reading books, I think parents really need to bring awareness to their own issues. Because if you have anxiety, likely that's because you don't trust yourself. And
Mm-hmm.
so then the question becomes why? Where did that come from? And what do
Mm-hmm.
you need to do about it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, because it starts there, right? And what's happening is parents are projecting all of that onto their children because they're
Mm-hmm.
not looking at it for themselves. And, you know, technology is affecting parents too, not just the kids. So it's an easy way to disconnect from yourself and not
Mm-hmm.
have to manage your feelings or manage anything that wasn't resolved. And I always like to say to parents, if they're struggling with their children at certain ages, like in their parenting, it's likely because at that age or similar age in their childhood, something was unresolved.
That's interesting. Why would you say that?
Because parents are a mirror for their children.
Mm-hmm.
So what they're giving you is a reflection of
Mm.
you.
Okay.
So for example, I have a 10-year-old daughter and she is a master eye roller.
Yeah.
And it's because of me. It's because I'm a master eye roller.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So they mimic us, right?
Mm.
They are little mini versions of
Mm.
us. And so if I'm struggling to parent her at her age, actually she's 10 and I struggled at 9 with her and my older one.
Mm-hmm.
It's because it's a mirror for my struggle at 9.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
So, yeah, it takes courage to be a parent then, in terms of what you are saying, because I need to look at myself and be really honest, brutally honest with myself about what is in my story that is affecting the way I parent. And that is painful sometimes to do and scary to do. And I think that's why many parents rather avoid that.
Yes, because there's a thing in psychology called the good enough mother, or we can say the good enough parent, because
Mm-hmm.
thankfully dads are more involved in parenting now than they ever were. And I think that's wonderful. And the good enough parent is someone who needs to accept that they're not perfect,
Mm.
that they're going to make mistakes, there are flaws, and there are holes in your parenting that are going to affect your children.
Mm.
And not to a point that it's damaging if you are someone that can show up every day and act in love. Uh, but you will make mistakes, and they actually need you to make mistakes because they need to learn how to deal with that kind of pain.
Yes.
And if you can show up to them and all of that pain that you know that you caused them, then that can be a really beautiful way for them to learn how to be in relationship.
Mhm.
You are the first relationship for them.
Yes.
And you can help them with how to communicate. Hey, you hurt me. And to sit with them and say, yeah, I know I hurt you. I'm so sorry. And I'm going to do better next time. Because that's what they should expect in relationships later on in life.
Mhm. I agree with you 100%. It's an opportunity to model the right kind of behavior. How do you handle, like you said, communicating your feelings or the impact that somebody's behavior has had on you? How do you handle apologizing? It's an opportunity for parents to model. How do you handle conflict? How do you resolve it? All those things. And I love what you said, we are their first relationship. We can teach them all these things that are so important to learn. So it's actually a wonderful, exciting opportunity as a parent, because you are the first one who's going on that journey with them, taking them through those challenging experiences, those painful things that happen. Yeah, it's
That's right.
beautiful.
It is beautiful. So if you can accept that you are a good enough parent and that you're not perfect, then you are doing right by them.
And our children are going to grow up and also be not perfect people. And if they grew up in a home with parents who were not perfect, but were comfortable with being not perfect, and were able to handle their own mistakes, own their own mistakes, and like you said, show up for them, then they are also going to be comfortable with being not perfect. Where does this expectation to be perfect comes from?
I think it's a fear of abandonment and rejection. I think that, it's part of the human condition to fear loneliness and to fear that we aren't going to be loved. And we want to do everything right to avoid that. And in our efforts to do everything right, it's a detriment to not just us, but to people that we're in relationship with.
Because life is not perfect.
No.
That's just how it is, hey?
And
Yeah.
there's beauty in that, right? Like you
Yes.
said, it's very beautiful to be able to show up in that way, to give your children that example of life is hard and life will hurt you and other people will hurt you, and here's how you deal with it.
Yeah, that's the reality of it that children need to learn. Nicole, is there something that you can do when you work with children? Let's say you're dealing with a child, a teenager, obviously a child who's old enough to understand this conversation that we are having to a certain degree. But that child has a parent who's not aware enough, not self-aware enough. Can you help that child to help themselves? Or does it depend entirely on the parent and the way they parent the child? Or can a child, teenager, or an adolescent help themselves to improve?
I think ideally it should come from the parent. That's probably the easiest way, the path of least resistance. But we don't live in an ideal world or a utopia. And so I absolutely think that an adolescent or a teenager can help themselves. It's harder. It will probably take longer than if the parent were to make changes, but they certainly can. I've seen it in my practice through my connection with children and teenagers. They have been able to move past a lot of what keeps them stuck. But I think if the parents don't make a change, there will always be that pain. And young adulthood will be hard. And it's not that they can't overcome that. I'm a firm believer in, nobody's a victim. We all are responsible for our own wounding as we go into adulthood. But again, just harder for them.
Yeah. So there's a lot that can be done. And I think it takes effort from everybody.
Yes.
in the
Absolutely.
family.
Hmm.
Mm,
Yeah. The family works like a system.
mm,
So everybody has a role in that system.
mm,
And even the kids do. And we should expect, have that expectation on them that they fulfill their role and they
mm,
grow in their responsibility and mature and take ownership for that. Absolutely.
mm,
And the thing about the system, I like to explain it like an assembly line. Everybody does their part so that the system can function.
mm,
And if it's dysfunctional, then we can't change anybody else's part, but we can change our part because that's all we have control over.
mm,
And so if
mm,
we changed our part, then actually the whole system would be forced to make somewhat of a change because
mm,
the assembly line can't work the way that it does if you don't do your part, right? Even if
mm,
so the part can be healthy or the part can be dysfunctional, and you can change your part to be healthy, and inevitably something in the system will change from that. So to your point, if a teenager is working on themselves but a parent isn't, and the teenager stops acting out or breaking the rules or doing the things that maybe are making the parents angry, then the parents might be a little bit more calmer and might be a little bit more willing to make
mm,
changes then.
mm.
But I don't like to put that on children.
Yeah, of course
But
not.
if I have to because the parents aren't doing it, then it absolutely is available.
Yeah. And it's also in a family dynamic, if one person changes or makes a shift of some sort, it does have a ripple effect and it does have an impact on everybody around them and hopefully a positive impact.
That's right.
So let's say I'm a parent who's been leaving my child with their technology. I've literally not been parenting at all. And my child or my children are now teenagers and they're used to having all this freedom with their technology. And I'm just going out of my way and bending over backwards to keep them happy little people. But now I've realized that I've made mistakes and I need to change. Where would you advise I start?
I think giving giving the family some rules around technology is a great start. So even if it's something as simple as, hey guys, we're all going to sit down at the dinner table and eat dinner together and look each other in the eye and have a conversation without any devices
Mm,
or distractions. And even just that little bit of time that you've given them that is a little, planting of a seed to, oh, actually, you know what? This feels good
mm,
because it's not just removing the technology. I always like to tell parents
mhm,
this. And this is why so many parents are so afraid to take it away or limit it or delay because they think when you remove it, they're going to have a big reaction. They're going to be sad. They're going to be depressed. They might be really angry. So don't just remove it and replace it with connection.
mhm,
Because
mm,
what you're doing is you're telling them, this is where it's at.
mm,
This is what you need. And I can tell you, I can guarantee you and bet all my marbles that that will feel good to them. It will
mm,
feel better than being on their device, and they will want more of that.
mm. Even if they're not used to it, and it might be a strange experience for them the first few times.
Absolutely.
Mm,
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's what they need.
mm,
So it's like, you only drink juice and you never drink water.
mm,
And then suddenly you start drinking water and you realize, oh, actually, my skin is more clear and I feel better and I'm not getting headaches.
mm,
And even though you're not used to the water and it may not taste as good as the juice,
mm.
you think, oh, you know what? Maybe I should drink more water and then I'll have less headaches.
Yeah. So yeah, it works out well. Eventually, you
Mhm.
can see for yourself.
Mhm.
And what about communication? Because if we this disconnected in a family, we obviously don't know, we're not used to communicating with each other. How does one build that bridge as a parent? How do I start communicating with my children and find that connection? I've now said we're having dinner around the table instead of in front of the TV.
Mhm.
How do I get that off the ground if we don't have that, if we're not used to doing that as a family?
I think a good start would be to just start asking questions.
Mm-hmm,
And, the questions can be specific to their day or more general. If they're older, you can talk about current events. We're having an election year here. What are people talking about at school? What do you think? Those kinds of conversations. It can be very simple.
mm,
Um, and just, I think parents often think that, I like to call it a Disney day, that they
mm,
they need to have these elaborate, you know, things that they do to connect to their children.
mm-hmm,
You need to take them to the carnival, or, you know, to the museum, or organize a big event to spend time with them, go on vacation, spend a weekend away. None of that needs to be done to spend time with them.
mm,
It could be as simple as, hey, we're all going to cook dinner together tonight. You're going to chop
yes,
up the carrots. You're going to prepare, the stew. You're going to pour, you're going to stir, and we're going to all do it together, and then we're going to eat together. It can be that simple. And
it
then
really
because,
can be simple. Mm,
yeah, yeah. And then because we prepared it together, when we sit down and eat, we get to discuss, how all those ingredients came together, and why it tastes so good. And
mm,
maybe it needs more salt, or what do you think it needs? And again, then all of a sudden you have this conversation, and you didn't really have to do much to have it.
mm. As I'm listening to you, I'm thinking I have this product that I developed. It's a set of conversation starters. And I actually want to just turn around and look on my shelf. I've got it in a jar here.
Mhm.
Um,
Oh, that's
you
neat.
can buy them on my website, and it's all printed. I've cut them out, and they have like a topic. Where's the camera? I don't know if you can see this. A
I
topic
see it. Yep.
to talk about it, and they're all questions. I'll put a link with this in the video where we post it, but resilience boosting conversation starters is what I called them. Now, I raised my children with these conversations, but we have always communicated well. We always had dinner around the table and had these conversations. And there was a time when they were young and excited and couldn't wait to bring out the jar and pick up a question to talk about. So when you mentioned you start asking questions, I realized, yes, that is such a good way to do it. And the questions are about their experiences and how they feel about things and how they think about things. So that's a really good way to get them to talk and have a nice
Absolutely.
conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, because the thing is when you start asking them questions about themselves, they want to talk about themselves, right? That
Mm,
feels good to them, and that feels very validating.
mm,
What are kids doing on their devices? They're
mm,
getting validation, or they think they're
yes.
getting it. They're not
Mm,
really getting it because it's never enough, but that's what
mm,
they want. And so validation doesn't come in the form of always talking about feelings, and making sure that they know their feelings are okay, because that's not always going to happen. They're not always going to have a feeling to talk about.
mm,
Validation comes in the form of asking them like actual real questions about themselves, and real
mm,
questions about their day, and what their experiences are.
mm. And what they're thinking and what their views are on certain things. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's amazing. There's so much we can do as parents to help our children. I find I love being a parent. I absolutely love being a mom and raising I have two boys who've just about grown up now. Oh, goodness. The oldest one wouldn't like that. He's almost 22. He's really grown up.
Not almost grown up.
Yeah. But we know the brain doesn't mature until about, what, 25, after 25 these days, eh? So
Yeah.
he's still got a bit of way to go. But I love being a parent and I love doing creative things with my children. So I'm actually absolutely enjoying this conversation. I'm so glad that you're bringing up the discomfort and the things that parents tend to avoid because it makes them feel uncomfortable without realizing the detriment to their children or even the harm that's done or things that their children would be missing out on because they are too afraid or uncomfortable to be with that discomfort and or to face those difficult, challenging situations.
Yes, yes. And I think um that that's pretty normal. I don't think that it's something that parents need to be feel ashamed of. Um, I
Agree.
think I think that often parents, when they think about maybe some of the things they're doing that they need to change, or they feel like it's a mistake, going back to that good enough parent example,
Mhm.
um, being in that discomfort of knowing that you have some work to do
Mm,
is normal. We all have work to do.
we do.
I like
Mm,
to think of it as I'll never stop working on myself.
mm,
There's always something. And
yes.
and that's not about perfection. That's about evolution and how we should really always be challenging ourselves and changing and growing.
Mm,
And so to really hone in on that for parents, I think is really important that this is a positive thing. This is a growth thing.
mhm,
And in order to grow, you have to be uncomfortable. There is no way around it. The only
mhm.
way out of it is through it.
Definitely, definitely. And like you said earlier, it's part of the human condition. And that ties in so beautifully with my initiative that's called Get Up and Grow.
Mhm.
That's what we have to do. And that's what we do almost naturally if we allow ourselves to just be with whatever is uncomfortable, feels painful even, and become curious about that so that we can uncover the life lessons that are hidden in there and learn from it. And when we learn, we grow and we become better at what we do, which is a beautiful opportunity. And that's so much a part of life. That's who we are.
Yes.
Mm.
Yes. Yeah.
Nicole, in closing, is there a final thought, some wisdom or inspiration that you can leave parents with? Because some people might watch this conversation and feel overwhelmed and think, oh my goodness, I've really messed it up. What do I do now? What
Yeah.
would you what would you leave parents with?
I want parents to know that they have so much more power than they think they have.
Mm-hmm.
And while we might think that our kids today are being influenced by technology or media and we have no control over that and it just is what it is and this is how they're growing up. I think the opposite. I think that we need to know that we have more influence on them than anybody. We know them better than anybody, and we can't give up on trying to impart our relationship and our connection onto them because actually they want that and prefer that.
Mm,
So if you did it, even very simply, like we were talking about around the dinner table, you would experience that that is your power right there. Something, such a simple act is powerful.
mm.
And that will encourage you to sort of keep going on that trajectory. So there is no need to be overwhelmed by that because you are more than you think you are, and they need you.
That is so valuable. Thank you so much. Nicole, thank you so much for this conversation and sharing your wisdom with us. I really, really appreciate your time and your input. Thank you.
No, thank you. I appreciated speaking to you too. I think that I can tell that you're very connected and have been a lovely mother. And it's nice to have this conversation with someone who has experienced it since your kids are older.
It's wonderful. Thank you. It's great to connect with you.
Thank you.